the more religious people that I grew up with. So I grew up in what was essentially a frontier town. Fairview had only been settled about 50 years before, scraped out of the prairie 50 years before. We were in the northernmost reaches of the North American prairie.
Yes.
And it was a relatively rough working class town. And most of my friends were relatively rough working class kids. And I hung around with, I wouldn't exactly call them delinquents because there were some seriously bad kids and my friends weren't in that group, but they were, most of them dropped out of high school, in grade 10 or so, worked on the rigs. They were tough kids. And there was the odd evangelical.
Yeah.
They weren't exactly Jesus freaks because we weren't a hippie community, really. But I was leery of them because I think there was a Nietzschean reason for that, is that, Nietzsche said that most morality is cowardice. Now, he didn't mean that morality was cowardice because he wasn't a simple-minded character, but what he meant often was that people who were afraid justified their fear by giving it a facade of the moral.
Yeah.
And what I noticed about the moral Christian teenagers that I knew is that they were timid and afraid and obedient, and they justified that by reference to their religious morality.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that. I liked one of my best friends, for example. He got kicked out of school when he was in grade 10 for picking a fight with the phys ed instructor. And you think, well, that's pretty bad. It's like, well, he was only 15 and this phys ed instructor could do an iron cross. He was tough, muscular, tough guy. And the fact that my friend picked a fight with him, I'm not trying to whitewash that, but it was also extremely brave. He was not a coward.
Yeah.
And it was a foolish thing to do because had it progressed to any great distance, he would have been pounded flat. But he was a tough kid.
Yeah.
And I admired that. And when I watched the more religious types, so to speak, they were too afraid to engage in life. And then I learned later, as a psychologist, there's a literature on misbehavior in adolescence. Okay, so you imagine a normal distribution of misbehavior.
Yeah.
Over here are the kids who, they steal and they drink and they take too many drugs and they engage in early sexual promiscuity and they don't do well. That's like pathway to life course criminality. Right. Then there's the kids over here who never break any rules. Well, they don't do well either. Yeah. They end up dependent and depressed and anxious. And then there's the kids in the middle who break enough rules when they're teenagers to explore, but basically take a straight path. They're the ones that do well. And so I saw the religious types, so to speak, fall into that timid camp that was dependent. And that turned me away from that.